الهدى يا شهر الندى.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين. We start with the name of Allah. We praise and thank Allah for all of the endowments He bestowed, without Allah being obligated to give anything. And we ask Allah to raise the rank of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the ranks of his wives, believing relatives, companions, and those who followed them sincerely until Judgment Day. Moving on, we'll continue, God willing, mentioning the summary of Sheikh Abdullah Al-Harariyy. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him. In the last lesson, we spoke about the integrals of the prayer, and we mentioned that there are 17, and we went through them, continuing from where we left off from the class before that. And now we will start talking about the congregational prayer and the Jumu'ah prayer, as that is where the Sheikh continued to after mentioning the integrals. The congregational prayer, that is for the 5 daily prayers to be prayed in congregation, is a communal obligation, meaning that if this was fulfilled and satisfied by some of the Muslims, then those other Muslims who failed to perform it in congregation would not be sinful, like people who pray it in their homes, for example, or at their jobs, etc. This communal obligation of praying the 5 daily prayers in congregation must be done in a way where it's accessible to the one who seeks it, not like in a group of people praying in someone's home, but they would pray it, for example, in the masjid. The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, praying the 5 prayers in congregation is a communal obligation, fardu kifaya, upon the free pubescent resident males who are unexcused. So these are the individuals who this communal obligation is directed towards, the free pubescent resident males who are unexcused. So with the statement of the author free, the slave is excluded. It is not obligatory upon the slave to pray the 5 prayers in congregation. This obligation is not directed towards him, so if he left it out, then he would not be sinful, even if others left it out. The pubescent, this communal obligation is directed at the pubescent, so the impubescent child, the one who has not reached puberty yet, is not included in that. And we mentioned previously the signs of pubescence. There are 3, 2 of which apply to males and females, and the 3rd is exclusive to females. And they are the completing of 15 lunar years, and that's for the male and the female. For one to see their mani, their ejaculated fluid, by having a wet dream or the like, and that's also for males and females. And 3rd, and finally, is the onset of menstrual bleeding, which is exclusive to females. And the youngest that would occur is at the age of 9 lunar years, or approximately 9 lunar years. That is, if her bleeding started before her 9th lunar birthday by what's less than 16 days, then it would be considered menses, and she would be considered pubescent. If the bleeding occurred before that, then it would be considered sickness, bleeding, the blood of defect, not the blood of menstruation. He said resident males who are unexcused. So with resident, the traveler is excluded. With males, the females are excluded. And with those who are unexcused, those who are excused are excluded. So it's not an obligation on the traveler to establish the 5 daily prayers in congregation. And this includes a person who traveled to other than his hometown and then intended to stay there what's less than 4 full days. That is, not including the day of entry and not including the day of exit. And the day of entry starts with the Fajr time. So if one arrived in a town before Fajr, then when the Fajr enters, then that's a full day. From that Fajr time that would be considered the first full day. And the day of exit ends at Maghrib time. So if a person remained in the town, if a person intended to remain in the town till Maghrib time came in, then he would consider that also to be a full day. And males, this communal obligation is directed towards males, so it's not directed towards females. And the Prophet ﷺ taught that the woman's prayer in her home is more rewardable than her prayer in the mosque, although her prayer in the mosque is still valid. He said, and those who are unexcused. So the one who has a religiously valid excuse to abandon the communal, the 5 daily prayers in congregation, then they would not be sinful. And an example of that is the heavy rains. If there was heavy rains and the person didn't have something to cover themselves, to protect themselves with, then they would be excluded from this communal obligation. So if they left it out and it wasn't prayed in congregation, they wouldn't be sinful. He said, however, it is a personal obligation, fardu ayn, in the Friday prayer upon them, that is, upon the aforementioned prepubescent resident unexcused males, if they were 40 accountable inhabitants, accountable meaning sane and pubescent Muslims, and inhabitants meaning that the town of the Jumu'ah prayer is their hometown, their town that they don't leave in the winter or the summer except with the intention to return. So there are numerous people who will be excluded from that. Like in Philadelphia, we have numerous colleges. And so there are students who come and they may stay for 2, 4, 6, 8 years. But however, they don't actually consider this their hometown. They want to return to the town they grew up in after that, for example. Then they wouldn't be considered an inhabitant in this way. So if there were 40 free pubescent male unexcused inhabitants or unexcused male inhabitants, then they would be obligated to pray the Friday prayer of Jumu'ah in congregation. The Jumu'ah prayer is a prayer that is only valid if prayed in congregation, so it is not valid if prayed individually. If there weren't 40 men who fulfill these conditions in the town, then they wouldn't pray the Jumu'ah prayer in that town. Rather, they would continue praying Dhuhr like in the other days of the week. He said, if they were 40 accountable inhabitants living in buildings, not in tents. So, accountable excludes the insane person, as it is quite apparent the insane person, his prayer is not valid, nor is it obligatory. And he said, living in buildings, not in tents, not like the nomadic people, the Bedouins who are the tent dwellers. They are those people who live outside of towns and pitch tents. They are not included. However, the Shaykh will mention some details pertaining to that for the people who live outside of the town and what is forthcoming, God willing. He said, because it is not an obligation on tent dwellers, meaning praying the Jumu'ah prayer is not an obligation upon them. Then the author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, the Friday prayer is also obligatory upon those who intend to stay in the place where the Jumu'ah prayer is performed for 4 whole days, excluding the day of entry and the day of exit. So if a person had been traveling, but the destination that he'll arrive at, he intends to stay there for 4 full days or more, then when he arrives, he would be considered a resident, not a traveler. It's not his hometown per se. It's not his hometown. However, he would no longer be a traveler due to his intention to remain there for 4 full days. Because of that intention, upon his arrival, he will go out of the state of a traveler. And because of that, he would be required to perform the Jumu'ah prayer in congregation in that town if the other conditions were met. And we mentioned already about the day of entry and the day of exit. He said it is also obligatory upon those who can hear the call of a loud voiced person standing at the closest edge of the settlement to them. So, if there were some people who lived outside of the town of Jumu'ah, the outside of the town where the Jumu'ah prayer is being performed, however, they lived close enough to that settlement that if a person with a loud voice stood at the closest edge of the settlement to them, not the center of the settlement, nor the furthest edge from them, rather the closest edge of the settlement to them, and they called the adhan, considering still winds, not a lot of, not the existence of background noise that would render the adhan, make it so that you couldn't hear it. If a loud voiced person stood at the closest edge of the settlement to them and called the adhan, and they could hear the adhan from that, considering that they have moderate hearing, not extremely sharp hearing that's like more than what's common, more than what's the median, or what's considered moderate, nor considering a person who has very bad hearing, so that they would need to hear something much louder than the average person to be able to hear it. Rather, considering that they have moderate hearing without strong winds or this type of background noise, environmental noise, if they could hear the adhan from that distance, from where they're camped, where their tents are pitched, even if they couldn't make out every single word, but they could understand it as the adhan, they recognize it as the adhan, then these people would be obligated to go to the town of Jumu'ah and pray there. So if some people lived outside of the town of Jumu'ah and they fulfilled these conditions, that if someone with a strong voice was standing at the closest edge of the settlement to where they are, and so they could hear the adhan called from there, then they would be obligated to attend the Jumu'ah in that town. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. Then the author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, continued saying, the conditions of for the Friday prayer are to be performed within the early afternoon prayer time. So the Dhuhr prayer has to be performed, the Jumu'ah prayer has to be performed during the Dhuhr time. He said, for the 40 inhabitants to hear the two speeches during the time of the early afternoon prayer and before the Jumu'ah prayer. So the aforementioned 40, who are the free, pubescent, unexcused male inhabitants, those 40, they have to hear the two speeches, meaning the integrals of the two speeches. And as the Shaykh will mention shortly, that is merely the hamd for Allah, the salah upon the Prophet, the order with at-taqwa, God-fearingness, a verse with a complete sought meaning in one of the two speeches, and supplication for the believers in the second speech. That these 40 have to hear these parts. This is what they are required to hear. He said during the time of the early afternoon prayer. So these speeches must take place during the Dhuhr time. And they would occur before the actual prayer. Not like, for example, the Eid prayer, where you pray first and then there's a speech. The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, continued saying, to be prayed in congregation by the aforementioned 40 inhabitants, and it can of course be more than that among those who attend women or slaves or prepubescent youth or travelers who are not required to pray, but still it would be valid from them, etc. He said, for there not to be another Jumu'ah prayer simultaneous within the same settlement. And this is a matter that Imam al-Shafi'i concluded from what was the circumstance of what happened for the first 100 years in the nation of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that during the time of the Prophet and the caliphs who came after him for 100 years, no second Jumu'ah was prayed within a town. Rather, always there was one Jumu'ah for the whole town. He said himself, Ash-Shafi'i said, even if the town was big, even if the town was big, still you would pray one Jumu'ah in the town. Everyone would be required to gather in one location and pray together. He said, for there not to be another Jumu'ah prayer simultaneous with it in the same settlement. If two Jumu'ah prayers were prayed simultaneously, according to this saying in the Shafi'i school, both of them would be invalid. However, there is some more detail. If the town was large and it would be a hardship for all the people to gather in one place, according to the saying of the scholars inside the Shafi'i school, the Shaykh will mention that. He said, if the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, the takbirah of Ihram, of one Jumu'ah prayer preceded that of another, then the former would be valid and the latter would be invalid. Meaning the takbirah, the opening takbirah of the Imam, if the Imam of one of the two Jumu'ah prayers that were prayed in one town finished the Ra in Allahu Akbar, that is, he finished that statement before the takbirah of the other Imam at the other Jumu'ah, then the Jumu'ah of the preceding the first Jumu'ah, the one whose Imam finished the takbirah first would be valid, and the succeeding Jumu'ah would be invalid. And this is with the condition that it's known which one was first and which one was latter. If it was unknown which was first and which was second, then the Shaykh said that both of the Jumu'ah prayers would be invalid. So he said, if the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, of the Jumu'ah prayer, of one Jumu'ah prayer preceded that of another, then the former would be valid and the latter would be invalid. This is the case if the people were able to congregate in one place. This is what some of the scholars of the Shafi'i school said in appending and adding to the statement of a Shafi'i himself, that if it was a difficulty for all of the people to gather in one town, then it would be valid to have more than one Jumu'ah prayer performed. However, it would only they would only establish enough to meet the need. So if there were more Jumu'ah prayers established than what meets the need, then the similar conditions would still apply. Those who came latter would be invalid, meaning the first Jumu'ah would be valid. If the second Jumu'ah was to fulfill the need, it would be valid. And if the third Jumu'ah was more than what was necessary, then it would be invalid. He said, however, if it was hard for them to congregate in one place, then both the former and the latter would be valid. And that is the case. And Allah, the Exalted, knows best. والحمد لله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
يا شهر الخيرات والإحسان والبركات يا رمضان